So Representative Felix did a wonderful job. Mr. Chair and members of the committee did a wonderful job describing what this bill does. And in light of the written testimony that we provided you with, I just want to touch on a couple of different points. So the words cash bail and financial conditions of bail have been used interchangeably. Let me just cover that a little bit for you. Rhode Island eliminated cash-only bail in 2008 by enacting legislation introduced at the request of my office. And what that means is that cash bail only cannot be imposed except in very limited circumstances. What Representative Felix bill gets at is financial conditions of bail, meaning cases where someone has to go and retain a bail bondsman or post money in order to secure their release. So this legislation then is entirely consistent with what you did in 2008. But more importantly, I think it is consistent with Rhode Island law on bail that's been around for a long, long time. Law created by our Supreme Court, law created by court rules, and a law created by the General Assembly. So why then do we need this? Rhode Island bail law needs to be tweaked, and you've heard some of the reasons for that. Right now we have, and the law is crystal clear on this, there is a presumption of personal recognizance in all cases except in very limited circumstances. And that being said, we think that there is room for improvement. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago there was a slightly different version of this, and I provided the committee with the results of an APRA request to show people being detained on financial conditions of bail in misdemeanor only cases. And this legislation that Representative Felix has put in deals only with misdemeanor cases. And what we learned from that data was this. There was a surprising number of people who were detained for an inability to post bail, and it actually surprised us how many there were. Now, what we learned is from these numbers was that it dropped off quickly. Folks posted bail within 3 or 5 or 7 or 14 days. And by the 14th day, just about everyone had been bailed out. But by then, the damage that Steve Brown talked about and that Anusha talked about had already been done. People had lost housing, they'd lost employment, and so they really begged the question for us is, why are we doing this in the first place? Why are we doing this at all? And so we read Representative Felix's bill as, while it is entirely consistent with Rhode Island law as it presently exists, put some teeth in it and says, you know, you can't, and it is limited to misdemeanor cases, but you can't impose financial conditions of bail. If you look at our testimony, you'll see that this movement, and it is a movement across the United States to get at monetary conditions of bail, to get rid of them, is being pursued via both legislation and litigation. And I gave you a list of the states that are doing it, in some cases both ways or one way or the other. And I'm here to tell you that while every state is different, and Rhode Island is certainly different and unique, the common thread, I think, that runs through all of these efforts going on across the United States and what's going on here in Rhode Island simply is this. And I'll just give you an example to help frame it for you. Let's say Representative Knight and I are charged with an identical crime. We have identical ties to the community. We have, our criminal record is exactly the same. We're identical in every respect. The amount of culpability is exactly the same. The only difference is this. I have money and can post bail, and he can't. And that's what some of these courts are now looking at and saying, that has to be a violation of equal protection of the law. That in misdemeanor cases especially, you are treating people differently based upon their ability to meet financial conditions of bail. I haven't looked at, I understand that there is written testimony from the court. I haven't had a chance to look at it. If you have, I'm going to guess that there's something in there about separation of powers. I'm here to tell you that, I'm assuming that's in there because that argument has been made in the past. I'm here to tell you respectfully, in my humble opinion, that is nonsense. There is absolutely no question that this body has the ability to enact laws on the issue of bail. Our statute books are replete. And some of them, one of them is amended by Representative Felix's legislation. Another one is referenced in her legislation. So this body has every right to say what bail conditions ought to be. You know, in 2008, when you guys said cash-only bail was unconstitutional, you had a right to do that, and nobody's challenged it. So, again, now I'll look pretty silly if there's nothing in their testimony about separation of powers, but I'm just assuming that there is.
There's a little bit in there.
Yeah, and you know, it's you know, it's not about whose ox is getting gored. That's not what separation of powers is about. Separation of powers is about the basic functions of government and who does what. Our trial courts are creatures of statute. You guys created them. It's okay for you to tell them, this is what we think you ought to be doing when it comes to bail. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions before I go on to the next bill.